Hello everyone. Tonight we'll step into a brutal and bloody world where marriages weren't born of love, but were a fight for survival, with a blade always hovering overhead. This is the story of Henry VIII's wives, beautiful women tormented by power, betrayed, and met with cold deaths. Forget any illusions of glamorous royalty. The truth will make you shudder and realize that surviving in the Tudor palace was harder than defying death itself. Before you lean back and get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content I share, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see people following from all over the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some background noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. Imagine waking up with a strange feeling in your chest, part excitement, part icy dread. You're not lying on a memory foam mattress, nor on the moldy straw of the Middle Ages. No, you're on a canopied bed, hand-embroidered with real gold thread, in a stone room cold as a tomb. Good news, you're not a peasant. Bad news, you're a noble woman, just beautiful enough to be chosen as Henry VIII's next wife. Yes, the king infamous for his 6 wives, 2 beheaded, 3 discarded, 1 dead in childbirth, and only 1 who survived by not loving him too much. You sit up. A lady in waiting silently approaches to dress you. Her eyes avoid yours. Her mouth stays shut. That's the first sign. You're not married yet, but people already look at you as if you're walking to the pyre. Your mother, once radiant with laughter, now whispers prayers in the corner. Your father, always beaming with pride, is now counting the new lands granted through this honorable marriage. You weren't asked for your opinion. You were informed, and now everything's ready. A deep red wedding dress, not white, because red hides blood if it spills. Your face is painted with heavy rouge, not to seduce, but to mask your panic. Your hair is brushed smooth, as if you're about to be painted in a portrait or carved into a tombstone. The church bells ring, not in celebration, but like the first tolls of a deadly game. As you leave the room, 2 maids follow, one carrying a cloth, the other oils, and a medicine chest. They don't expect the bride to shine. They expect her not to collapse before the vows. The long hallway is carpeted thickly, but you still hear your heart pounding like war drums. At the end is the throne. On it, Henry, the king, your soon-to-be husband, the man who beheaded a wife for daring to glance at a musician. He looks at you like one appraises a new racehorse, checking legs, posture, guessing fertility. You curtsy. Henry smirks. You hear something behind you, the sound of a door locking. The air is thick with incense. You're led to the altar. The priest begins the vows. You hear nothing but the blood pounding in your ears. Do you agree to be the king's wife, to obey, to love, to bear sons, to never betray, never frown, never yawn, never die before your duty is done? Of course, no one asks that, but everyone understands it. You nod faintly, and it's done. You've just married Henry VIII. Bulls, and the shadow of 2 axes hanging in the Tower of London. Now you're the king's wife, the lucky one, the next one. It's a beautiful day, until you remember today is also the anniversary of Anne Boleyn's execution, 6 years ago. You hear faint laughter from the crowd. Not congratulations, but bets on how long you'll last. Congratulations, you've been loved, in the way only Henry VIII knows how to love. Until he grows bored. And when that happens, history will have a new name, or not, because not everyone who loses their head gets remembered. Barely an hour after the wedding, the crown still heavy on your head, the lipstick not yet faded, you're left alone in a candle-lit room, not to rest, but to prepare. The wedding night approaches, or rather, the officially sanctioned fertility evaluation. Outside the door, maids pace with tense, pitying faces. They've seen this before. You haven't. You try to breathe deeply, but the scent of incense and rotting wood in the room chokes you. Everything around you is adorned with roses, not symbols of love, but of the Tudor dynasty. And, unsurprisingly, a flower with thorns. You wear a thin white nightgown, not for allure, but for easy inspection. It's tradition, or rather, a quality control ritual. In some courts, witnesses even stand outside the door, listening for the creak of the bed, to verify the marriage's consummation. In England, sometimes there's even an official document from the royal priest. You wonder, where do they store the king's certified proof of sexual performance? Probably in a locked drawer or on the executioner's desk, if things go wrong. Then the door opens. Henry enters. No armor, no smile. He smells of sweat and musky perfume, his gaze like a farmer sizing up breeding stock at a fair. You curtsy. He says nothing, just unbuckles his belt, and you understand this isn't about feelings. No one asks if you want this. No one needs you to feel romantic. You're the queen, and queens fulfill biological duties. For the next 15 minutes, you experience closeness to power in the most literal sense, and find it cold, heavy, and dehumanizing. Henry leaves without looking back. You lie there, eyes wide open. There's no fire of passion in you, only fear, and pain, and blood. A maid enters afterward, no questions, no words, just wipes the floor, and collects the bedsheet, the fabric that will be scrutinized tomorrow to confirm you were a virgin before, and a true wife after. If there's no blood, no one says, it's fine, only suspicion, and accusations. You've heard of the previous wives. Catherine bore a daughter, discarded. Anne, no son, accused of treason and incest with her brother, beheaded. Jane bore a son, then died. Each started with a night like yours, and ended with a funeral, or a verdict. You try to sleep, but every gust of wind outside sounds like the footsteps of guards. You haven't loved yet. You don't know what food your husband likes, what music, or what time he sleeps. But you're officially property, a new name in the records, a valued womb, a face that must smile on command. The next morning, as you leave the royal bedchamber, everyone smiles, but it's the smile of another object, entering the historical assembly line. A church official nods at you, like someone checking if an egg is boiled right. Henry is already gone from the palace, maybe in a meeting, maybe hunting, maybe already evaluating your debut performance. You realize there was no wedding night, just an exam, no love, just expectation that you'll conceive, bear a son, and keep your head at least until winter. You return to your room, lie on the bed, and stare at the stone ceiling. Yesterday's vow to love and protect feels like a dark joke now. And if you smile at this moment, it's the only genuine smile in this entire marriage, bitter, lonely, and the prelude to everything that follows. Welcome, you're Henry VIII's wife, and you've just completed the first part of a sentence that could last, or end abruptly with a swing of an axe. You're still lying there, in a room with flickering candlelight and the faint scent of dried lavender hanging from the rafters, but instead of feeling loved, you just feel cold. Not the cold of the weather, but the cold of heavy velvet blankets pressing on your chest, of silent stone floors, and of an invisible presence, the axe being oiled in the Tower of London, where every disgraced queen has a one-way ticket. Tonight was supposed to make you the luckiest woman in England, the king's wife, queen of the realm, given both throne and marriage bed, but you know better. Henry VIII isn't a man of tender nights and pillow whispers. He's a man of rules, lineage, and an obsession with immortality through a male heir. You're not someone to love, you're someone to breed. And in the candlelight, under a gossamer nightgown hand-stitched by mute nuns in some distant convent, you wait, not out of excitement, but because there's no other choice. Footsteps echo in the hallway, heavy, slow, steady, like the drumbeat in your chest. The door opens. Henry enters. No guards, no musicians, no priests, just him and his massive shadow on the wall, looking like a beast from legend. He doesn't smile, doesn't ask, just walks forward, pulls a chair beside the bed, and looks at you. His eyes are a strange mix of possession, suspicion, desire, and a weariness you've never seen in younger men. Henry VIII is no longer the curly-haired prince riding horses and playing lutes from the ballads. This is a man who's lost 2 wives, buried one, discarded another, and is now trying again, with you. You try to smile, to say something gentle, but your throat is dry, your lips trembling. He touches your hand, cold, hard, like someone checking the temperature of milk left out overnight. Then he begins, not gently, not fiercely, but precisely, like he's filling out a court form, not sharing a body with a person. Every movement has a purpose, to ensure, to confirm, to seal, and you, like a porcelain doll, lie there, trying not to cry, trying not to make a sound that could be misinterpreted, trying to hold on to the smallest intact part of yourself, your pride. Henry finishes quickly. He doesn't hug you, kiss you, or speak, just stands, adjusts his cloak, and turns away. But before opening the door, he pauses, looks at you, and smiles. Not a loving smile, but the smile of someone who's completed a duty. He leaves. The door closes. You hear the lock click from the outside. You lie there, paralyzed, staring at the ceiling, where candle shadows dance like hovering souls. Then a sound comes from the corner. A maid quietly entering through a side door. She says nothing, just bows, steps to the bed, takes the bedsheet, folds it, and places it on a silver tray. You know that sheet will be inspected tomorrow. A lady in waiting will examine every stain with a magnifying glass. If there's blood, if there's none, whispers will start. Not a virgin, untouched by the king, or unattractive. Those words, true or false, could send you to the tower. An axe doesn't need proof to behead a queen, just rumors. Your heart pounds like you've been doused in ice water. You haven't cried yet, but a drop of blood trickles from your wrist, where your nails dug into your skin too hard. Your wedding night ends without wine, flowers, or tender whispers, just a silence thick as congealed blood. And in the hallway, you think you hear the sound of an axe blade scraping against a whetstone, someone sharpening it. Maybe not for you, not yet, but your turn will come. Because in this palace, being the king's wife means living beside the blade, and the wedding night is just death's first greeting. The next morning, you wake in a bed too large for one, too cold for two. The king didn't return after the wedding night. He has business as always. Maybe a council meeting, maybe a fox hunt, maybe staring at a portrait of a new woman shipped from Flanders. Whatever it is, you're not in the plan. You don't ask, because a king's wife doesn't ask. You just sit up, let the maids bathe you, perfume you, pin your hair, dress you, and lead you in silence and ceremony, like preparing for a performance. But you're not performing. You're being judged. From the moment you leave your room until you return to bed, everyone in the court watches you, like you're a new fish, dropped into the royal aquarium. Maids whisper behind your back. Courtiers bow, but their eyes betray calculation. And Henry, he glances at you during breakfast, a look as cold as glass, quick as appraising a scrawny horse at auction. You understand immediately. Appearance matters, greatly. In the court, you're not allowed to be ugly. Even if you've just given birth, fallen ill, or learned your sister was sent back to the countryside for dropping a goblet in front of the former queen. You must always be fragrant, pale, wrinkle-free, unblemished, not breathing too heavily. Every entrance is an exam. The way you walk, hold your head, smile lightly, tilt your shoulders, all recorded in the minds of servants, to be gossiped about in kitchens, stables, churches, and eventually, the king's ear. And the king doesn't love those who aren't praised. He loves images, things that can be framed in gold. Last night, you were the new thing. Today, you're the new standard. Tomorrow, you might be a forgotten past, and another portrait of another girl will be sent from the artist's studio to Henry's study. You recall Anne Boleyn's story, loved passionately, then beheaded when she no longer pleased the king. Some say she was too sharp, too clever, too opinionated. Those things might be attractive at first, but in this palace, attraction has an expiration date. You start learning to observe closely who the king is noticing, who's been sent away from court, who laughed too loudly at dinner. Each sign is a small earthquake in the fragile structure of your queenly position. Do you realize you must always smile enough, speak just right, be clever but not challenging, soft but not foolish, and above all, beautiful, always beautiful, because here, beauty isn't just a weapon, it's your right to exist. Henry divorced Catherine because she was no longer attractive, beheaded Anne for treason, meaning, frowning, when he showed off a new ring, discarded Anne of Cleves because she didn't look like her portrait. You can do nothing but preserve your beauty, like it's the blood in your heart. Every pimple prompts a silent prayer. Every pale face from menstruation keeps you out of the light. You start drinking bitter herbal water, wearing masks of raw egg whites, and sleeping upright to avoid puffiness. Once you woke with a small scratch on your forehead from a maid accidentally hitting you with a silver mirror. You cried for 3 hours, not from pain, but because you knew if it scarred, you'd no longer suit the king's taste. And if you don't suit his taste, you're like a faded fish, scooped from the tank, given away, or tossed into the river. The Thames, deep, cold, no way back. Henry loves those beautiful as paintings, but paintings aren't allowed to age. So what about you? You're human, aren't you? Maybe, but here, You don't get to act like one. You're a wife, a role, a wax statue that can be smashed when the owner decides it no longer matches the bedroom's color. Every morning, you stand before the mirror and ask, am I still beautiful enough to survive today? And when Henry looks through you like a sheer curtain, you know your time lasts only until the tank's water changes, and Henry needs a new fish. It's been 2 months since the wedding night, and still no news from your womb. No nausea, no back pain, no missed period to spark hope. Your lady-in-waiting, tasked with tracking your cycle like the tides, starts looking at you with more pity than respect. Meanwhile, across the Great Hall, a 17-year-old girl, your cousin, who you once thought too young for politics, is now constantly invited to banquets. She's done nothing wrong, she just has bigger eyes, smoother skin, a slightly higher voice, and she's not you. Henry starts asking what she's studying. Then, he has her play a song at dinner. Then, he gifts her a handkerchief embroidered with an H. And you, the official wife, the queen, anointed by God and church, sit there like furniture moved from center stage to the wings. You smile. Of course, you still have to smile. But inside, each smile is a cut. You're not foolish. You've read enough biographies to know this is the transition phase. The phase when Henry VIII starts seeking new comfort, a polite way of saying so he's about to tire of you. The reason is simple. You're not pregnant. A wife, especially a king's wife, who doesn't bear a son, is just a walking political liability. The court is already preparing for the shift. The tailor begins measuring your cousin. The court painter quietly sketches her portrait in the corner. The ladies-in-waiting whisper about her freshness and youthful energy. You just have your period. Regular, on schedule. Each drop is a loss of hope and value. Henry isn't angry with you. He's still polite, still sends you roses in the morning. But you know this kind of politeness. It's the courtesy of a boss writing a reference letter for someone he's about to fire. One night, you hear laughter from the ballroom. You walk by. The door isn't fully closed. Inside, Henry is slow dancing with your cousin. His hand rests on her waist. His eyes meet hers as if he's never known you. And you stand in the hallway, hollow, like a cracked crystal goblet, not yet shattered. You return to your room, remove your crown, look in the mirror, and see you haven't aged a bit. You're still beautiful, still slender, still Tudor perfect. But what you lack isn't on your face, it's in your belly, and right now, it's empty. You start eating iron-rich foods, drinking warm, stimulating, herbal water, following the advice of an old nun who helped 3 queens conceive. But your womb stays silent, silent enough to make you want to scream at it. Meanwhile, your cousin begins wearing ribbons, Henry once reserved for his favorite. And then one day, you're told, Canute is moving to a room closer to the king. No one says why, no one needs to. You understand. The king is about to audition a new role, and you're halfway through your epilogue. It might be a divorce for incompatibility, or, if Henry wants drama, a fabricated charge of affections for a guard. You hear a maid was banished for looking at Henry too long, at a banquet. Don't look, don't speak, don't hope, just survive. You start writing letters home, asking about your mother, then you tear them up. You don't want her to know you're losing, because this marriage isn't love, it's a competition. Whoever gets pregnant first becomes the true queen. The rest are supporting roles, or death row. Night falls. You're alone in your room. Outside the window, the moon gleams like a cold blade. Your cousin is being serenaded by a harp in the next room. You lie on your side, hand on your belly. Nothing, just emptiness. And in this palace, emptiness isn't allowed to linger. If you don't fill it with a child, history will fill it with blood, maybe yours. In this palace, everything can be forgiven, except not bearing a son. You can spill wine on the king's cloak, drop a silver plate, even scowl at a bad hymn, and still be called charming but temperamental. But if you're not pregnant after 6 months, that's the start of an indictment. After a year, it's a curse hanging over your neck, heavy as a crown, sharp as the axe in the tower.
You know this?
Not just from whispers, but from Henry's eyes at dinner. No longer sparkling, just calculating. A wife who doesn't bear a son is like an unsigned treaty, a failed strategy, an unprofitable investment. And when the king is disappointed, so is the nation. Every morning you don't vomit, every week you're not unusually tired, is another day. The court holds its breath. No one says it outright, but they're counting your periods, the glances between the king and your cousin, the sighs you let out while fastening your dress. You're no longer a wife, you're a public medical report, and your body, complex, erratic, hormonal sensitive, is treated like a malfunctioning machine. Once, you overhear two ladies-in-waiting discussing a special tea used by midwives outside the palace to boost fertility. You drink it for 3 weeks. It leaves you writhing in pain, nauseous, sweating coldly, and fainting during a prayer service. But still, nothing happens. Henry grows more distant. One day, he skips mass with you. The next, he doesn't invite you to dinner. Then you hear he's ordered the West Wing reopened, Anne Boleyn's old quarters. You stand before the mirror, looking at your flat belly. No bulge, no sign. In your eyes, it's no longer a belly, it's evidence, an indefensible blank. You feel your body betraying you. Your heart beats, your lungs breathe, but your womb is silent as a grave. And here, not being pregnant is treason, not symbolically, literally, because if you can't produce an heir, the throne is in limbo, and limbo is instability, and instability is something a king never forgives. You start dreaming of the Tower of London. Once, you see yourself in a cold stone room, interrogated by a council of men in black. They don't ask who you killed. They ask, why can't you conceive? And you have no answer. No one does. In reality, the royal physicians visit you twice. They check your pulse, inspect your tongue. One even sniffs your hair to see if you have the scent of conception. Their conclusion: the queen may have a chill in her abdomen. The treatment: hot stone compresses, more prayers, and a horseshoe hung in your bedroom. You do it all, and still, nothing. Henry doesn't rage. He doesn't slam the table, shout, or draw his sword. He just withdraws, silently, gently, like someone shelving a book they no longer like and leaving the library. You feel yourself fading from the scene. No one stops to greet you anymore. No one invites you to play chess. You become a velvet-clad shadow drifting through the halls, smiling politely at those who no longer see you. Then, one morning, you're summoned to Henry's private chamber. He sits there in a fur-lined cloak, his gaze calm as if preparing a speech. He doesn't accuse, doesn't scold. He just says, "I need an heir. That cannot be delayed." You nod, no tears, no protest, because deep down, you knew you lost this battle. The first month you didn't feel nauseous. You leave the room, like you're leaving your own life. From now on, you're no longer the king's wife. You're a reproductive failure, and in this era, that's treason of the highest order. No swords needed, no rebellion required. Just a womb that won't cooperate. That's enough to lose everything. You realized you were being discarded when the statue of the Virgin Mary in the palace chapel was quietly removed and replaced with a plain wooden cross. It's not about decoration, it's an omen. Things start changing in small ways like that. Priests switch to English from Latin, services grow shorter, but their glances linger, as if sizing up allegiances. Then you notice Henry talking more about God's will, but not in a holy way, in a dangerous way. The way of a man using God as an excuse to clear earthly troubles. And the trouble, of course, is, you can't bear a son. The Pope won't allow divorce. So what does Henry do? He gets rid of the Pope. No exaggeration. He sends formal letters, half-hearted negotiations with the Vatican, then declares, England is no longer under the Pope's authority. He's the king, and now the head of the church. If God disagrees, God can be rewritten. You hear this first at a court session you weren't invited to, but rumors spread faster than die. Whispers say the king is about to marry another, that he's seen the light in a religious reformation, but you know the light began in the brown eyes of a girl 8 years younger, teaching courtly dance, and you know before he can divorce you, he must break the system that declared marriage sacred and eternal. So he breaks it, with power, armies, and laws. Monasteries are shut, monks vanish, prayer books are burned, statues are smashed, and you taught from childhood that the Virgin Mary protects wronged women, can no longer pray to her. It feels like you're in an earthquake that spares only the palace. Everyone pretends it's normal, but the eyes have changed. Nobles glance at each other, picking sides. Ladies in waiting choose teams by carrying the new Bible, and you're in the middle, needed by neither side. The king is about to free himself of you. The Pope, furious, calls you the rightful queen. You're the chain between two tearing forces, and no one remembers your voice. Every morning you walk the garden and see another statue toppled, Every night you sleep fearing tomorrow someone will say you're no longer the king's wife because the king rewrote the law, and then it happens. A decree passes stating your marriage to Henry was never valid, it never existed. You're not divorced, you were never married. Henry doesn't need a divorce, he just erases the past, he rewrites history, and history obeys. You're no longer queen, no longer wife, no longer anything, but you're still alive. In a smaller, colder room, farther from the throne, you're not allowed to leave the palace, nor appear too often. You're the past. The king doesn't want to see, but isn't ready to eliminate. So you live in a legal limbo. No title, no power, no love. You look out the window and see Henry riding with Anne Boleyn. She laughs like she's won forever. But you know no one wins forever in this game. You were once the chosen one. Now you're the forgotten one. And it all started with a silent womb, a stubborn pope, and a king ambitious enough to rewrite the laws of heaven. You thought divorce was a sad, private affair between two people. But in the Tudor court, divorce is a weapon, a performance, a trial where the accused doesn't get to speak. And you're not divorced. You're annulled, declared never married, erased from documents, prayers, and records, as if love never happened, as if you never existed. Even the seal bearing your image is melted down. The portrait in the Great Hall is quietly replaced with a younger, brighter face, and most importantly, one in favor. But the worst part isn't losing the crown, it's losing your name. You're no longer Her Majesty. You're Lady, a half-hearted title, like one used for an old chair. No one knows whether to keep or toss, and you start feeling like furniture. Moved to a smaller room, thinner curtains, dimmer light, no longer allowed at the banquet table. At first, people still whisper greetings as you pass. A week later, they only bow, then they ignore you, not out of hatred, out of fear of catching your disgrace. You're living proof that loving the king isn't enough. Being his wife isn't enough. You needed the right womb, the right timing, the right blood, and you didn't have it. Henry no longer visits you. He's busy with Anne, the Reformation, seizing monasteries, preparing for a new dynasty you're not part of. You hear whispers in the halls. Someone's drafting a charge that you were disobedient, critical of divine authority, too close with a Spanish priest. Each rumor is a brick in an indictment you didn't know was being built. And you understand, divorce here doesn't end with a paper. It can end in a trial or an execution. You've heard of the other wives, one sent back to Spain, one locked in a convent, one you know well beheaded on baseless charges, just because she no longer pleased the king. And now you could be next. You have no allies left. Your family is pulling away, afraid of the political whirlwind. A cousin who wrote wedding congratulations now begs off visiting due to chronic headaches. A friend who once kissed your hand now kisses the hem of Anne's gown. You look around, and the palace feels colder, larger, crueler than ever. You were once the center of every feast. Now even the birds don't sing as you cross the courtyard. You write to the king, brief, polite, begging to keep your old title, not for power, but for a shred of dignity. No reply. One morning, they come to take every piece of jewelry with the royal seal, and a new guard stands at your door, not to protect you, but to ensure you don't leave. You understand, it's over. Divorce here isn't about splitting assets. It's about erasing you from England's timeline. No one may mention you in sermons. No one may sing of you in courtly poems. You were once queen, now you're a risk to be managed. One night, sitting alone by flickering candlelight, you hear the creak of wooden wheels in the courtyard. A servant says, "The blacksmith's come to fix an axe handle." You laugh softly, not because it's funny, but because you realize, in the Tudor court, nothing is a metaphor. If you're a useless past, your head could be taken like an old statue, quietly, quickly, tearlessly. You pick up a pen and write one last letter, not to the king, to yourself. The first line, "I was once the king's wife, and I thought that meant being loved." The next, "Now I know it only meant being the first chosen for sacrifice." As you fold the letter, you're no longer afraid, just empty. Empty as the throne at midnight. Empty as the marriage vows, spoken amid execution drums. Empty as the heart of someone who believed in love and lost her head learning otherwise. Anne Boleyn entered the palace, not as a usurper, but as a fresh breeze, at least in Henry's eyes, and those of a court eager to find a reason to forget you. She's younger, sharper, her eyes always gleaming, as if daring anyone to look for more than 3 seconds without bowing. The day Anne became queen, you weren't invited to the ceremony. Of course not, but you still heard the bells, the singing and the chatter echoing through the halls. They called her England's future, the woman who made the king defy the church, an unquenchable flame. But you, who once sat on that throne, needed only one glance to know Anne isn't fire. She's oil, and sooner or later, she'll catch flame. Because Henry doesn't change, he just changes targets. And what he did to you, admire, marry, despise, erase, he'll do again, only with more drama. Anne doesn't yield. From the start, she challenged courtly norms. She refused to be a mistress, forcing Henry to marry her to touch her. She wrote letters in French, debated bishops, and never bowed too low. That enthralled the king and terrified the court. Because a clever woman is the last thing anyone here wants to see, especially on the throne. When Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, no one said much aloud, but you saw the nobles exchange familiar glances. Again, Henry still smiled, but his fingers tapped the table at every banquet. You know that habit. It's when he starts counting days. Anne tried. She miscarried. Twice. From what you heard from a maid still loyal to her conscience. And with each loss, Anne grew more anxious, more irritable, more like you. No one said it, but they started calling her the second version. That nickname carried no hope. Then the rumors spread that Anne was unfaithful, that she was too close to her musician, that she was too intimate with her brother. You heard and shuddered, not because you believed it, but because you knew the game. When Henry tires, he doesn't break up. He accuses, and accusations here need no proof, just enough whispers to become a sign from God. One morning, Anne was arrested in her bedroom. No resistance, no screaming. She just dressed, fixed her hair, and followed the guards like a queen, because she still was, until the axe met her neck. You weren't allowed out, but someone whispered the story. She was held in the tower, allowed a Bible and a small lute. A guard said he heard her sing. Another said she laughed. But one thing was certain, she didn't cry before she died. On the execution morning, the sky was overcast. Wind rose from the river. You stood by your room's window, looking toward the tower, seeing nothing but wet roof tiles. But you knew, just beyond a few walls, a woman who once took your place was stepping onto a wooden platform. She spoke a few words, calm, courteous, without resentment. She knelt, and then silence. The axe fell once. No repeat needed. You live. That's your greatest achievement now. Not because you're skilled or spared, but because Henry has a new target to destroy. When Anne Boleyn lost her head, you weren't called back to the throne. No one came to place the crown back on your head or lead you to the seat of honor. They just ignored you. You, the wife whose marriage was annulled, once the center of every banquet, now a hallway ghost, real, named, with a heartbeat, but unmentionable. They call you Lady, a vague title like an old dress hung in a wardrobe, not new enough to show off, not ruined enough to discard. You live in a smaller room, with a colder hearth, and the servants' eyes are as dim as spent candles. You're still fed, still dressed in velvet, but last year's velvet. No more brocade, no fresh flowers each morning, no musicians playing as you enter the hall. Now you walk in silence. The stone corridors are long and cold, like Henry's heart when he ordered an execution. You know every tile, every crack in the wall, every window where light filters in like silent eyes watching you. You start counting steps. 73 from your room to the library, 51 from the library to the chapel, 89 from the chapel to the small garden. No one visits. You walk these paths daily, not because you have a destination, but because there's nowhere else to exist. Your old maids now serve someone else. Some bow when they see you in the hall, others turn away. You don't blame them. Here everyone learns the lesson. Don't get close to the disgraced. Disgrace is contagious. Linger too long near you, and they'll be suspected of sympathy, and sympathy, in this court, is one glance away from treason. Henry marries again. Of course, Jane Seymour, younger, meeker, less argumentative than Anne. You hear she's pregnant. Jane Seymour entered the palace like a gentle ghost. Soft steps, soft words, soft as if each movement apologized for replacing someone else. She wasn't sharp like Anne. steadfast like you, or vibrant like Catherine later. Jane was silence honed by watching the women before her fall. She didn't resist or demand, she just smiled at the right time, bowed just enough, and did what a wife was expected to do, bear a son, and she did. Jane was pregnant within a year of her wedding. Henry, the man who once declared the heavens must bow to Tudor blood, turned childlike, pacing the halls, summoning astrologers, hanging charms everywhere, and ordering Parliament to pray publicly for the pregnancy. You heard it all from afar, from your room where lullabies no longer echo and the curtains have faded. You don't envy, you lack the strength to envy, but you watch. You know a woman carrying a dynasty's fate is no longer a person. You're still there, still in the palace, still walking cold stone corridors each morning, still dressed by maids, still eating off silver plates, still called lady, with a mix of hesitation and pity in their voices. But everything has changed. You're no longer the center, no longer the protagonist in any story. Now you're a shadow on the gossip's edge, someone new maids are warned to avoid if you don't want trouble. A relic of the palace, no one dares remove but no one wants to see. At a banquet, your seat creeps toward the table's end. In the chapel, you're no longer invited to the front pew. Court painters stop asking if you want a portrait. They're busy sketching the next wife, Anne of Cleves, described as refined, quiet, and unambitious. Sound familiar? It's like they're describing you, only this time Henry's choosing anew as if you never existed. You pass thick stone walls, see Jane's portrait hung beside Henry's, her eyes as if she never bled to death after childbirth. You remember Anne Boleyn, her face removed from its frame and replaced with flowers, and you, never painted, because you were erased from the start. No portrait, no legacy, no memory kept, except papers noting you as the lawful wife, annulled for invalidity. You once thought yourself lucky for not being beheaded, but now you wonder, is living while forgotten truly living, or just a prolonged existence in the negative of the past? You're not allowed to leave the palace, nor to participate in anything. You're like an antique forgotten in storage, dusted once a month to remind people you're not dead, just no longer counted. Young maids bow as they pass, but their eyes flick away, as if lingering too long brings bad luck. You try talking to an old servant, asking about his family. He bows, hurries off, mumbling about delivering tea to the future queen's new room. Everything slips from your grasp, not with violence, but with a suffocating silence. And in that silence, you hear more, the wind whistling through corridors, the clack of someone else's shoes echoing at night, the faint thump of your heart when Henry passes without a glance. One day you realize it's been 2 days since anyone spoke to you. Not a word, not a question, not a smile. You laugh alone, the sound echoes in the room, like water on ice. And you understand you're becoming part of the architecture, not a person, a polished stone, placed just so, untouched, undestroyed, but unwanted. One day you try a new hairstyle, pinned higher, with a silver brooch, the only one left from your queenly days. You pass Henry in the corridor. He doesn't look, doesn't ask, doesn't pause. You return to your room, remove the brooch, lock it in a wooden box, and never try again. You get the message. You mustn't stand out, mustn't be vibrant, mustn't remind anyone of what you were. You're only allowed to exist as an edited memory, faint, hazy, unintrusive. And that's the worst part. You're not toppled. You're faded, worn down bit by bit, day by day, breath by breath, tar, not by sword, not by knife, but by deliberate forgetting. In a world where every word is politics, every glance layered, every silence a verdict, you're a living witness to one truth. Power isn't lost with a bang. It's lost with footsteps fading away that you're not allowed to follow. You're not expelled from the palace, but the palace has left you behind, and you, who entered with flowers, music, and a wedding, are now a shadow by the wall of power, cold, silent, invisible. Anne of Cleves stepped into the Tudor palace like a freshly unveiled painting, vibrant yet enigmatic. She wasn't a traditional English girl, nor a fragile muse. Anne came from the distant lands of Germany, bringing a distinct air, an unfamiliar accent, and a proud European style. When Henry VIII saw her through the portraits sent to the court, he exclaimed, "This is the one," but that one quickly turned to deep disappointment when Henry met Anne in person. The painted image was distorted by coarser features, a rounder face, and a demeanor unlike his imagination. Henry, who set impossible standards for both beauty and presence, felt deceived. At their first meeting, he even called the marriage his life's greatest mistake.
Yet.
Remarkably, Anne didn't resist or demand. She possessed a quiet but steadfast resilience, fully aware of her place in this power game. Instead of trying to please Henry, Anne chose to maintain her inner independence, refusing to become the king's puppet. During her 6 months as his wife, Anne lived like a medieval escape artist, deftly navigating the cold palace walls, dodging the invisible traps that ensnared her predecessors. She lacked Anne Boleyn's fierce allure or Catherine Howard's mournful sighs. Anne was a blend of resolve and stillness. Time passed so quickly that many in the court barely noticed how long she'd been queen before she vanished from the throne. Henry's divorce from Anne was swift and surprisingly peaceful. They didn't part with daggers or schemes. Instead, Henry claimed the marriage was improperly consummated due to physical and emotional incompatibility. Anne didn't protest. She agreed to the divorce and was granted a generous settlement and the title King's Sister, a lofty-sounding but powerless designation that kept her in the palace without real authority. After leaving the throne, Anne lived as a wealthy, cheerful, and independent lady, while Henry continued his quest for the perfect wife. Anne of Cleves' story is a lesson in Tudor survival. Strength isn't always needed to win. Sometimes wisdom lies in knowing when to step back and preserve your life. You, standing in the palace's shadows, see Anne not just as a failed wife, but as one of the few women who escaped this sweet yet deadly trap. Anne is proof that in Henry VIII's world, survival itself is a victory.
Oh.
You wonder, could you be another Anne? Or will you, like so many before, be swept into the storm of power, caught in schemes, and vanish without a trace? As the candlelight fades and the palace falls silent, you quietly vow you'll learn to be as wise as Anne. To survive, even for a day, even for an hour, in this cruel world is a miracle. And sometimes, that miracle is knowing when to let go. Catherine Howard entered Henry VIII's life like a spring breeze laced with sweet perfume and youthful innocence. But that same breeze carried the inevitable tragedy of naivety. Barely 20, with a radiant face, wide, clear eyes, and a smile as fresh as summer flowers, she stepped into the palace with all the innocence of a girl, unaware she was entering a deadly game, where every mistake cost a life. Catherine wasn't well educated, or versed in politics, or convent prayers like her predecessors. She only knew how to smile, to charm, to captivate Henry in the fleeting moments he gave her. Her perfume was a sweet scent that turned heads in the court, but it also signaled a reckless gamble. Henry, now older, heavier, and known for his volatile temper, was quickly enchanted by Catherine's youth and guileless beauty, seeing her as a new toy to refresh a life grown dull and suspicious. But behind the initial glamour came crushing loneliness, cold nights without comfort, and the relentless scrutiny of the palace's shadows, servants who weren't just attendants but spies, ready to report you to the king for a sidelong glance or a laugh too loud. Catherine slowly realized she wasn't just a girl in love, but a pawn on a chessboard of deadly political intrigue. She was bound by her past relatives, who'd faced trials for suspected infidelity or treason, rumors of her own murky history, and above all, Henry's unyielding jealousy. Henry didn't forgive mistakes, let alone women who weren't perfect by his standards. Stories about Catherine became court gossip, accusations of secret affairs, clandestine meetings, true or false, all used to prepare for a fateful trial. When she was arrested, not by strangers but by those who smiled at her daily, Catherine clung to her innocence, perhaps the last innocence of her life. In her days imprisoned in the Tower of London, she tried to maintain the image of a girl who committed no crime, no betrayal, only a victim of the power game she was dragged into. But the Tudor court showed no mercy. There was no forgiveness for innocence, no leniency for sweet perfumes that didn't meet standards. The trial wasn't a chance for vindication, but a scripted drama with a predetermined end. The charges, possibly twisted testimonies, unreliable witnesses, all designed to push Catherine to the gallows, where her pale neck would roll in the stifling silence of the courtroom. Before her execution day, Catherine still didn't grasp the game. She believed in love, in justice, in Henry's kindness, despite his repeated betrayals. Her death was a warning, not just to the women of the court, but to all of England, that innocence in the Tudor palace was the deadliest trait, and no perfume, however sweet, could mask the bitter taste of power and betrayal. You watch her story from afar, feeling the chill of the gallows seep into your spine, knowing that without cunning, without knowing when to smile, you could be next. Thus, Catherine Howard's story isn't just a personal tragedy, but the starkest warning to every king's wife. Never let innocence blind you, for here, every smile can be a double-edged sword, and every breath might be your last on earth. Catherine Parr arrived in the Tudor palace like a gentle, wise breeze. Unlike her predecessors, she wasn't strikingly beautiful or alluring, but a woman who could read, calculate, and above all, fear. Fear wasn't weakness, but a survival instinct honed by the horrific fates of previous wives, beheaded, exiled, discarded, or dead young. Catherine understood better than anyone that in this palace, survival wasn't luck, but an art. She didn't come to be a queen like a poetic beauty, but to endure, to navigate, to tend the fire of a chaotic dynasty. Fluent in Latin and Italian, she was the first woman in the court who could stand before Henry and discuss scripture, law, and politics without trembling. This surprised and slightly unnerved the king. For Henry, who craved control, a knowledgeable wife was a challenge. She could question, opine, make him pause to think. But Catherine never challenged Henry directly, instead using subtle finesse, gentle yet sharp words, turning political talks into intimate moments. She knew when to stay silent, when to speak, when to retreat, a survival skill few queens possessed. Unlike her predecessors, Catherine didn't draw attention with beauty or youth, but with wisdom and foresight. She was the first to dare advise Henry on state matters, and the first to accept his supreme authority over the English church without protest, a compromise that kept her alive and influential. Catherine also navigated court politics with care, building allies and avoiding traps that felled her predecessors. She wasn't just a queen but a political companion, an advisor, and sometimes a soother of Henry's sudden rages. But Catherine wasn't flawless. She was a woman who feared death, loss of power, becoming another tragic page in the Tudor book. That fear didn't weaken her, but made her stronger, sharper, always staying one step ahead. She knew no one was ever truly safe in this palace, and fear kept her from falling into the abyss of executions, baseless accusations, or cruel abandonment. Catherine survived Henry VIII's final days, not as the most beautiful or beloved wife, but as the one who chose wisely, feared wisely, and befriended silence when needed. When Henry died, Catherine remained, still on the throne, not a crowned queen, but the last queen of a dynasty rife with tragedy and upheaval. She was proof of a truth in Henry VIII's palace. It wasn't the most beautiful or clever who lasted longest, but the one who feared most, and used that fear to her advantage. You reflect on her story and wonder, what can you learn from this final woman? Can you become one who reads, calculates, and fears to survive the brutal storm called Henry VIII? For here, amid cold stone walls and prying eyes, that's the only thing that can save you. Wit, caution, and a touch of luck no one dares name. Henry VIII was no longer the youthful, golden-haired, sword-wielding prince you knew from courtly tales or faded tapestries. Now he was far older, in both age and health, and it showed not just in his massive belly, but in a complex, dark, dangerous soul. Old wounds on his leg, from a failed hunting accident years ago, worsened, causing pain, hobbling him, and sparking sudden tempers. His body ballooned, muscles sagged, sweat poured constantly, the once pleasant scent now replaced by an unmistakable, unhideable odor. Henry was a heavy mass, moving slowly, his eyes always carrying irritation and suspicion. But this made him more dangerous. No longer the reckless youth, he was now a cunning old wolf, calculating, knowing when to strike and when to retreat for a lethal blow. Every decision was weighed, sometimes cruelly, sometimes coldly enough to make the palace shudder. Physical discomfort, loneliness, and suspicion turned Henry into someone no one dared face directly. His courtiers read his mood through glances and tiny gestures, as a misplaced word could cost a head in an instant. The fatter Henry grew, the more his power was cemented by fear. He used his massive body and imposing presence as a weapon, forcing everyone to bow, speak his will, and harbor no doubts. Royal banquets were no longer just festivities, but silent battles of wits, where every word could be an fur, every smile could be a sentence. Deep down, Henry knew he was no longer young. Once England's symbol of strength and power, his fading health and advancing age made him increasingly insecure about his throne. But instead of showing weakness, he made himself untouchable. His age became an invisible armor, his bulk a trap that intimidated enemies. Henry knew power wasn't just about favor but fear, and he used every ounce of himself to maintain it. You, standing outside the palace door, see this aged king pass by, no longer the dashing prince, but a symbol of ruthless, desperate power. You can't help but feel both awe and dread. For in Henry VIII's world, the older and fatter he got, the more dangerous he became, and no one outlasted this king-turned-monster, unless they knew how to bow and breathe softly. You've learned the first and most crucial lesson in the Tudor palace. Don't look at the king too long. Henry VIII is no ordinary man, and his gaze is not that of a kind husband or a gentle king. His eyes are like a sharp blade, probing, questioning, commanding. A single glance is enough to make one tremble, a silent warning that if you don't control your own eyes, you could be the next target of his merciless judgment. You remember standing by the door as the king passed through the corridor, your eyes darting away instantly, not daring to meet his for more than a second. A lingering look, a mistimed smile, even a heavy breath as he passes could be misread as defiance, disrespect, or worse, a plot against him. You once saw a maid reprimanded for looking at Henry a few seconds too long at a banquet. She vanished from the palace mysteriously, and no one asked why. You've also heard chilling rumors about those who dared meet the king's gaze, that they were demoted, exiled, or even lost their heads. In this palace, controlling your gaze isn't just courtesy, it's a rule of survival. You learn to breathe lightly, almost holding your breath, when Henry passes. You don't dare let your breathing echo too loudly in the cold stone corridors, where sound can travel to the king's ears like terrifying whispers. Once, at a banquet, as Henry walked by, you felt like you were suffocating. Trying to breathe softer, you accidentally let out a slightly louder breath, and immediately felt his piercing gaze snap toward you like a drawn knife. Then he grimaced, and no one dared touch that moment. You understand that in Henry's world, power lies in absolute control over every detail, from words to gestures, from glances to breaths. You can't stand out, nor can you fade into oblivion. You must be someone who can vanish when needed and appear at the right moment to please him, without drawing unwanted attention. In the endless days at the palace, you become a master of social invisibility, knowing when to speak, when to smile, when to stay silent, and when to retreat. You know a single moment of carelessness could bring catastrophic consequences. And more than that, you understand that the mutual respect and fear among courtiers form the invisible walls that keep Henry secure on his thorny throne. You once thought power was shown through words, swords, or thrones, but here, power also lies in the smallest details. A glance, a breath, a timely nod. You see maids, nobles, and officials trying to mimic your ways, adjusting their gazes, restraining their breaths, keeping a safe distance from the king. Some succeed, some fail, and you learn that sometimes, survival isn't about being the strongest, but knowing when not to look, not to speak, not to breathe. You practice daily to become a living statue, without reaction, without emotion, without error. Henry doesn't need a wife who loves, he needs a wife who survives. And that's the only way to exist in a palace, where every breath could be the end of a life. You understand, don't look at the king too long, don't breathe heavily when he passes, because in every glance, every breath, lies the power to destroy a person. You don't want to be the next one swept into that ruthless vortex of power, and you won't be, not today, at least. You slowly realize that everyone in the palace lives behind a thick mask, so dense that sometimes you can't tell what's real or fake. Ladies in waiting smile at each other, but behind your back, they say things you dare not hear. Courtiers shake hands in private meetings, trading secrets that, if leaked, could land someone in prison or cost their life. Even you, who once believed you could be yourself, who dared dream of love and sincerity, now must learn to pretend. Pretend not to know, pretend to be happy, pretend not to notice the cold glances or scheming whispers as you pass through the corridors. You smile at Henry, but inwardly agonize over every word he says to you, words laced with suspicion, reproach, and distance. You chat with maids, but every sentence is carefully chosen to avoid becoming a weapon in someone's hands. You attend banquets where every eye watches, every gesture is noted and judged. You learn to hide your true emotions, though inside you may be roiling with pain, worry, and despair. In this deceitful world, sincerity is a luxury no one can afford. You can't let anyone see you weak, can't let anyone know you're afraid, because fear is bait for predators, for those waiting for your misstep to bring you down. You must become a flawless actor, playing the perfect wife, elegant lady, future queen, though inside you feel like a woman collapsing on a stage with no audience. You remember long nights lying in bed, where only moonlight and your steady breathing make you feel alive. You wonder if there'll ever be a day you can live truly, love truly, without pretending. But the answer is always silence. In this palace, silence isn't just safety, it's the sharpest weapon. You must stay silent when Henry rages, when rumors spread about you, when schemes could end your life at any moment. You slowly see yourself as no longer a person but a symbol, a piece in an endless power game. And whether you want to or not, you must play, because here, the weak are eliminated, the strong survive, and the pretenders have the best chance of lasting. You smile in the mirror each morning, not from joy, but to remind yourself you can still pretend. Pretend until dawn, until the king needs a new wife, or until you find an escape, a thought you don't even dare entertain. But for now, you're still here, and that's your first victory in this endless game of pretense. Henry begins writing his will. You begin writing a farewell letter in your mind. Each time you hear the scratch of a quill on paper, your heart beats faster, as if it's a death knell meant for you. Henry is no longer the vibrant young man he once was. Now he's a heavy shadow of power, full of suspicion and unpredictability. His massive belly, larger than the throne, acts as a steel shield, hiding the relentless pain from his leg, but also symbolizing a dynasty's decay. When Henry picks up the quill to write his will, he's not just writing for himself, but for England's chaotic future, for unborn children, current and future wives, factions waiting for their chance to rise. And you, standing on the sidelines of this life, know that the farewell letter you've never dared write in reality, the one in your mind, grows clearer in your thoughts. You write not to send to anyone, but to free yourself from the fear surrounding you. Each imagined line is a goodbye, an apology never spoken aloud, a prayer for your soul's peace. Henry writes his will with cold certainty, dividing power, wealth, and succession so decisively no one can object. Meanwhile, you sit alone in your room, holding an imaginary pen, trying to write the things you've never dared say: loneliness, fear, memories of days when you were briefly loved. You know you could be forgotten, replaced, or worse, vanish without a trace, like so many former wives. But deep down, you cling to a sliver of hope that one day these lines will testify to your existence, proof of someone who loved and was betrayed. Henry, meanwhile, signs pages, seemingly unaware of your silent turmoil. He no longer cares about your smiles, your tears, or your quiet pleas. All he cares about is securing the throne, preserving power, and preparing for a new generation to carry his unfinished ambitions. You look out the window, seeing faint sunlight pierce the cold stone walls, and feel life's fragility like that light, fragile but unextinguishable. You think of unsent letters, unspoken words, unrealized dreams, and you know no matter how Henry writes his will, history will ultimately write his story. And you'll be the silent reader, the quiet scribe, in the shadows of a turbulent dynasty, full of marriages, never called love. While Henry signs, you keep writing in your mind, a farewell letter for a life without a choices, but brimming with unexpressed emotions. You know you're not alone. Hundreds of women have written such letters in their minds, apologies, laments, and wordless farewells. You take a deep breath, bracing for tomorrow, a day when Henry might sign a new page, but also a day when you might finish your mental letter, needing no signature to know it's over. Henry dies. The news spreads like a bitter wind through the Tudor palace's cold stone corridors, once echoing with the heavy steps of a fat, powerful king. But his death brings no peace or release, as many imagined. Instead, it leaves a heavy shadow, lingering in every dark corner, in the wordless sighs of those who were his wives, maids, subjects under his rule. The palace remains the same: cold stone, flickering candles, thick walls hiding countless stories. But now, a bleak stillness hangs in the air, as if Henry's soul hasn't left, but turned into a grim breeze, sweeping through rooms and halls, chilling the survivors. Everyone in the palace knows that even in death, Henry's power and fear endure undiminished. You see his shadow in the frightened eyes of courtiers, in the cautious whispers, when someone dares cross the line between respect and disrespect. Even the throne is no longer just an object. It's a haunting symbol, reminding all of power's cost. A cost Henry paid with blood, tears, and betrayal. You remember living beside him, sleepless nights, hearing his irritated growls, being watched by his sharp eyes, moments when he seemed just a lonely man in endless rage. Now, those memories are ghosts you can't escape. You hear stories of Henry's death told in drawing rooms, a king who went to his grave alone, tormented by unhealed wounds, imprisoned by a bloated, frail body. They say his final days were spent staring into space, as if searching for something unattainable. But though his body is gone, Henry's shadow remains in heavy curtains, cold stone floors, footsteps that never cease echoing in the halls. And you, who lived under the same roof, feel that shadow most keenly. It won't let you forget what happened. The unhealed wounds, the indelible scars. The palace is no longer a place of life, but of memories. Memories of a king who taught everyone lessons in cruelty, power, and the cost of desire and powerlessness. You pass through rooms once filled with laughter and tears, now holding only sighs and whispers of survivors. You realize Henry's death doesn't end the story. It opens a new chapter, a chapter of power struggles, schemes, and silent battles, where no one knows who'll win. And in Henry's shadow, everyone must live, with fear, caution, and faint dreams of a better tomorrow. You wonder if you can escape that shadow, or remain part of this dark, chaotic mess, walking cold corridors, hearing the echo of a dead king who never truly left. Edward VI took the throne at a tender age, just 9 years old, a teenage emperor placed on the heavy throne his father Henry VIII left behind after years of bloodshed and strife. With bright eyes not yet mature enough to grasp the weight of kingship, Edward stepped into a world of peril and traps that even grown men struggled to navigate. Under the cold gaze of courtiers and advisors, the boy had to learn to ride horses, read scripture, and above all, survive in the scheming, suspicious Tudor palace. Though hailed as Henry VIII's sole legitimate heir, Edward carried a curse. The curse of Tudor blood, power, betrayal, and death always shadowed those of his lineage. From his reign's first days, Edward faced immense pressure from court factions. Older advisors vied for influence. Stepmothers and Henry's former wives subtly fought to sway the boy's decisions. And looming over all was his father's dark shadow, a brutal king who could turn love into hatred, behead a wife for a displeasing glance. Edward was not just the throne's heir, but a pawn in the political battles among factions, a child torn between power and control. His frail health was part of that curse. Edward wasn't just a young king, but a frequent patient of fevers, pneumonia, and other deadly ailments untreatable by the era's medicine. They say each time Edward coughed or weakened, the court trembled, as his death could spark a brutal war for the throne. In his short reign, Edward tried to advance the religious and political reforms his father left unfinished, pushing the Church of England toward Protestantism. But with a child's heart, he couldn't bear the burden alone, always needing advisors' guidance. You stand on the sidelines of the boy king's life, seeing in his youthful eyes profound loneliness, a child raised not with ordinary love, but with overwhelming responsibility and pressure. Each day, Edward faced decisions no child should, and you know that no matter how hard he tried, his fate was sealed by the dangerous Tudor blood. The curse wasn't just a legend, but a chain of tragedies, with Edward an inescapable link. When he passed away at 15, Edward's death left an unfillable void in the Tudor dynasty, a warning to the living that power and life are sometimes separated by a fragile thread. You quietly watch the small figure of a teenage king, and understand that while youth may be hope, in the Tudor palace, it's also a burden that ends many lives before they can begin. Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, ascended the throne with a heavy mission and a history steeped in conflict. Known as Bloody Mary by heretics and history, which recorded her fierce actions to restore Catholicism in England, Mary was not just an heir, but an embodiment of vengeance and a fervent desire to protect the faith she cherished since childhood. As a young girl, Mary witnessed her father, Henry VIII, divorce her mother to marry another, enduring her mother's suffering and years of exclusion from court. Those memories shaped a woman both strong and haunted by power and faith. Upon taking the throne, Mary had no choice but to place absolute trust in the Catholic Church, seeing it as her sole source of strength to secure her crown and stabilize the nation. She swiftly began purging Protestants her father had championed, branding them heretics and traitors. Public executions multiplied, with burnings and beheadings creating an atmosphere of fear across England. You, having lived in the palace under Henry VIII and Edward VI, witnessed this horrifying shift. Mary wasn't just a queen, she was a symbol of uncompromising resolve to preserve her ancestors' faith. Yet she was also the loneliest woman on the throne, surrounded by enemies and ceaseless suspicion. Mary's ruthlessness wasn't merely political, it was the voice of a deeply wounded woman, striving to hold on to what remained of her family and beliefs. Church services grew solemn and heavy, with bells tolling like warnings to those daring to oppose the Queen's authority. You hear tales of victims' heartbreak, people arrested for differing beliefs, tortured, judged without mercy. The palace became a vault of dark secrets, each step echoing with cries for help. Under Mary's cold gaze, everyone watched their words and actions to avoid becoming the next target of punishment. You recall your days as Henry's wife, when dreams of a peaceful, prosperous England seemed distant. Now with Mary on the throne, those dreams turned into nightmares of blood and tears. But you also understand Mary was a product of her time, of unavoidable turmoil, and like every woman in the Tudor palace, she was just a pawn in a brutal power game. You quietly observe the events, wondering if history will be fair to Mary, or if she'll remain a symbol painted by her enemies and the survivors of those bloody days. In lonely nights, you tell yourself that perhaps no king or queen truly triumphs in this battle for power and faith. Only survivors, the haunted, and the ghosts of the past continue to watch your every step in the cold palace. Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, took the throne as England stood on the brink of upheaval and unhealed wounds from Henry VIII's reign and turbulent religious reforms. Unlike her mother, beheaded amid hatred and suspicion, Elizabeth was known as the Queen who never married, a symbol of independence, power, and sharp intellect. From youth, she lived under the shadow of her predecessors, fully aware of the traps and dangers lurking, especially the peril of trusting a man in the Tudor palace. She grew up in solitude, shunned by her father, witnessing her mother's power stripped and tragic end. But Elizabeth didn't let that define her fate. Upon ascending, she knew that to survive in a man's world, she had to wield not just power but wisdom to hold her throne. Unlike prior kings and queens, Elizabeth chose celibacy, a decision not only to shield herself from political revenge, but to maintain freedom in a world rife with marital constraints. Despite advice to marry for alliances and strength, Elizabeth stood firm. She knew marriage didn't bring freedom, but new traps, the kind her mother and predecessors paid for with blood and tears. Over her 40-year reign, Elizabeth turned the palace into a stage of power, where she was both director and star performer. She mastered using words, glances, and silence to control those around her, an art few could learn. Under her rule, England flourished in culture, art, and maritime prowess, marking a golden age. Yet, beneath her commanding exterior, Elizabeth harbored private struggles. She knew loneliness was an inevitable companion of the throne, that every decision required careful weighing against pressures from within and outside the palace. She never forgot her painful origins, the tragedies of her mother and Henry's wives, which made her cautious, sometimes seen as cold or distant. You, standing on history's sidelines, see Elizabeth as a symbol of strength and resilience, but also recognize the silent sacrifices behind her throne, the relentless struggle to preserve life and power in a world unkind to the weak. Elizabeth wasn't just England's queen, but the queen of independence, of tough choices, and of a life facing her past shadows. She chose not to marry, not to bind herself, not to give her heart, and that ensured her survival, making her a legend, a shadow of power, amid the Tudor palace's tales of love and betrayal. You quietly think that, among all the stories of love and power, Elizabeth's is the only one proving that sometimes, not choosing, is the strongest choice. You step out of the palace. The heavy door closes behind you, its echo resonating through the cold stone walls, marking the end of a chapter in a life you thought would last forever. But though you leave that place, the Tudor palace never truly leaves you. It's etched into every breath, every step, every thought. You're no longer a queen, no longer center stage in the drama of power and desire, but a wanderer, a survivor, with a heart full of scars and indelible memories. Each time you recall the palace, you see cold corridors, probing eyes, whispers behind your back, and the chilling laughter of those who once shared your throne, now ghosts in your memory. You carry the solitude of one abandoned by life, a mix of freedom and captivity no one can fully grasp. Though no longer under Henry VIII's or his successor's direct rule, you can't escape the past shadow. The palace remains part of you, like a deep scar time can't erase. You step into the outside world in simpler clothes, no longer adorned with costly silks or glittering jewels, but in your soul, you don royal garments each night in sleep, garments of power, expectation, and unfulfilled dreams. You can't forget the betrayals, the abandonments, the times you had to feign strength before those who laughed behind you. Those memories teach you that power isn't held forever, but can vanish overnight, leaving emptiness and endless longing. You realize you didn't just lose the throne, but part of yourself, the part that believed in love, loyalty, and vows sworn under royal chapel arches. Now, you're a traveler between two worlds, one gone and one yet to come. A world of historical ghosts, and one of unclear opportunities. You learn to live with invisible wounds, sleepless nights, and days filled with doubt about the future. You write unsent letters, tell stories no one wants to hear, and keep secrets only you understand. And wherever you go, whatever you do, the Tudor palace follows like a long shadow, reminding you of what was lost, what was paid, and what you can never reclaim. You're not just part of history, you're its witness, its narrator, sometimes its forgotten soul. But deep down you know, though you stepped out of the palace, it never steps out of you. It's an inseparable part of your heart and soul, like a deep wound time can't heal, and a lesson never fading about power, love, and survival in Henry VIII's chaotic dynasty. Being a king's wife isn't like fairy tales or lyrical songs of queens in splendid palaces. Being a king's wife, especially Henry VIII's, is like being thrown into a maze of traps, where every step could lead to a snare ready to swallow you whole. You have no map, no light, and certainly no guide. The maze is built of power's cold walls, unblinking eyes, and whispers ready to turn into daggers at your back. Each day in the palace is a silent battle for survival, where you must stay alert, anticipate enemies' moves, and keep calm while your heart pounds like it might burst. You know a single misstep, a misplaced word, a glance too long, or even a mistimed breath could be reason enough to be cast from the throne, or worse, lose your life. Henry VIII beheaded 2 wives, women who once stood where you stand, and history teaches you that in this maze cruelty spares no one. You can't trust love, for here, love is a luxury, a deceitful game where you're just a pawn for bartering and scheming. You learn to say what others want to hear, to smile without revealing your true feelings, to avoid dark corners where betrayal is woven daily. In this maze, every maid, courtier, and servant could be an ally or enemy. You can't predict who'll keep their word or betray you for a small gain. You also know the maze offers no easy escape. Even if you slow your steps, think through each move, danger lurks in every corner. Rumors, baseless accusations, interrogations, and relentless scrutiny turn the palace into a trap with no exit. You've heard of Henry's wives, dragged to trial for no clear crime, only for no longer pleasing the king, suspected infidelity, or simply failing to bear a son. You know survival in this maze doesn't rely on justice or mercy, but on cunning, staying in the shadows, and enough luck to avoid the final trap. Sometimes, you feel like a tiny mouse in a vast maze, where every path leads to danger. You dart from one corner to another, dodging axe-sharp traps, invisible hands, dark gazes, but the maze never lets you rest. It doesn't let you forget the tension, the fear, the crushing loneliness of a survivor. You fight not just external enemies but yourself, your doubts, exhaustion, and the loss of parts of you. And in those moments you wonder, is there an escape for someone like you? Will there ever be a day you step out of the maze, out of the darkness, and find light? But the answer never seems to come. You know only one thing: being a king's wife, especially Henry VIII's, means preparing for the worst and surviving it. It's a game with no rules, no mercy, only survival, and the fleeting victory of the luckier. So you may not choose where you were born or the fate you bear, but you can choose how to move forward with alertness, courage, and a bit of luck in this trap-filled maze. And who knows, perhaps that vigilance and perseverance will make you the last survivor in the bloody power saga of Henry VIII. Love in the Tudor era is not like the romantic tales you've heard or the lyrical poems filled with roses. Here, love isn't sweet whispers under moonlight, warm embraces, or passionate kisses. Tudor love is something far harsher, a blend of sharp blades and red ink, of power and cruelty, of life and death. When you enter the palace as a king's wife, you don't just bring hopes for a new life, but also the weight of unspoken rules and unvoiced codes. Love isn't a choice but a duty, not an emotion but politics, not forgiveness but purging. You see it in Henry VIII's cold eyes, a man who never lets his heart lead, but always follows power and national interest. Each of his wives is not just a partner but a piece on a political chessboard, a vessel for Tudor blood, a symbol of the nation's prosperity and stability. Yet, this makes love more fragile and brittle than anything else. They love you not for being human but for your ability to bear a son, and when you fail, love vanishes like a fleeting breeze. Wedding vows are mere ink on paper, fading memories, stories rewritten at power's whim. You can't rely on love to survive. You must depend on cunning, finesse, and a bit of luck to avoid being erased from the game. In the Tudor palace, love is written in blood, blood of beheaded wives, executed traitors, children robbed of their futures before growing up. Red ink isn't just for documents. It's blood-staining papers, walls, and sometimes the finest silk gowns. You see this in every story, every verdict, every funeral rite in the palace. This isn't love but fear, a fear crafted to protect power, maintain order, and remind all that no one, not even a queen, is above that power. You learn that love in the palace isn't a heart's choice but a survival choice. You must know when to be friendly, when to keep distance, when to speak, and when to stay silent. You must know every small act could be misunderstood, weaponized against you. Above all, you must understand that love exists only in its permitted form, controlled, dictated, and manipulated by forces never revealed. You look in the mirror, seeing your face, beautiful but not fully free, beautiful but burdened. And in those eyes, you see a woman not loving, but trying to survive. You quietly think that in a world where love is stained red with blades and ink, surviving is the greatest love story anyone can endure. And if you can keep your heart from shattering in that maze of power, that's proof of strength, resilience, and the grit of a Tudor king's wife. You didn't die. It sounds simple, but in the Tudor palace, surviving is an achievement not everyone can claim. You didn't become a legend. Your name isn't in history books. No radiant portrait or praising poem honors you. You're not famous. And perhaps that's the best thing that could happen to you. Because fame in this palace often means you've stirred enough waves to become a target of envy, schemes, and ultimately cruel punishment. You live in the shadows, quiet and discreet, like a ghost not permitted to exist. People passing by see only a faint figure, sometimes puzzled as they try to recall who you are, or coldly indifferent, focused on the next king, new queen, or endless power struggles. You're not chosen to be loved, celebrated, or remembered, but you're still alive, and that alone marks a silent victory in a world where death can come at any moment from a wrong word, a misplaced glance, or baseless suspicion. Your existence reminds you that, though abandoned, erased, and treated as non-existent, you can still hold on to life and walk your path. You've witnessed, endured, and learned painful lessons others couldn't bear. You're not a symbol, not a figure in history, but a wordless storyteller of an era, a survivor of history's storms who wasn't swept away. And perhaps, in a world rife with cruelty and power, not dying, not being immortalized in blood-stained pages, not becoming a symbol of tragedy or triumph, is the most precious thing. You may not have been chosen as a queen, but you chose not to vanish. You may not be loved, but you've learned to love yourself through quiet resilience and courage. You're not famous, but you're a survivor, and that's the one thing no one, not even the most powerful kings, can take from you. If you could return to the first day you stepped into the Tudor palace, what would you choose? Would you wish to be less beautiful, less noble, or even non-existent in this world? Those questions, though filled with sorrow and torment, haunt you in long, lonely nights. You recall that day when you were told you'd become the king's wife, a privilege or a curse, you never truly knew. You think of the youth and fragile beauty that got you chosen, but also made you a target in the palace's bloody games. You wonder if being less beautiful would have led to earlier, less painful oblivion, or if you weren't of noble blood, would you have escaped the maze of power for a simple, poorer, but safer life? Some days, you wish you were an anonymous girl in a distant village, known only for laughter and farm work, not a player on the royal stage of blood. You imagine being absent from the Tudor power map, no prying eyes, no gossip, no endless pursuits. But that's just a fantasy, because you're here, in the palace, in a game you can't quit. You realize that even if you could choose again, escaping your fated path would be near impossible. The truth is, life offers few choices. You must live with yours, whether it's a trade-off between life and death, love and power, existence and erasure. You look back with both pain and gratitude, pain for unrecoverable losses, for unhealable heartaches, gratitude for surviving to tell the tale, to prove that in such a cruel world, one can still fight and endure. You quietly vow that even if you could choose again, you'd likely still enter the Tudor palace, still face the trials and dangers, because no one can perfectly escape fate, but at least you'd know how to prepare, how to defend, how not to be crushed by power's wheel. And in those moments, you understand that choices aren't always yours. Sometimes, survival is about accepting and adapting to the unchangeable. You know you're not alone. Thousands of women have walked, are walking, and will walk your path, carrying unanswerable questions, unspoken pains, and quiet hopes for a different tomorrow. And ultimately, you realize that whoever you are, whatever you do, everyone faces their own life, with choices, consequences, and lessons only time can teach. You lift your head, gaze at the distant horizon, and wonder, could there be a day, in another world, where you live free of wounds and loss? But today, you only know you chose to survive, and that's the one thing you can take pride in, amid all the unchosen. They remember Henry VIII as a powerful, brutal king who endlessly changed wives, policies, and a nation's fate. They remember Anne Boleyn as a youthful, sharp queen, a symbol of defiance and tragedy, who paid dearly for ambition and misplaced love. They remember Elizabeth I as a great queen, a symbol of resilience, independence, and England's golden age. But you, who stood beside these figures, who was part of that bloody powerful history, are forgotten. Your name isn't in the retold stories. No grand portrait of you hangs in palaces or museums. You're a torn page, a faded memory gathering dust. No one remembers you, sings of you, or tells their children about you. And that makes you both sad and relieved. Sad because oblivion is another kind of death, one without mourners, without a gravestone, without vows, but relieved because you're not a target for power struggles or curses after death. At feasts, dances, or political meetings, you're just a silent shadow passing through, unnoticed, unfeared, undesired. You're not the center of power, not a target of hatred, nor a character in carefully staged tragedies. You exist as a quiet tale, proof of the nameless but essential women in history, who lived, loved, suffered, and endured, yet never made it to the official pages. You know this oblivion isn't denial, but part of the power game. In the Tudor palace, fame often means enduring enough turmoil to become a legend, but that legend isn't for everyone. Some must sacrifice self, honor, and life to let others shine. You accept that, though sometimes in the quiet night, you wonder, are you worthy of being remembered? Does your story deserve telling? But then you know, in this world, silent existence is an achievement. You endured what few could, days of fear, shattered dreams, betrayed relationships, and unshareable loneliness. And though unremembered, you're an indispensable part of the Tudor dynasty's vivid history. You're the backstage figure, the firekeeper in the dark, giving depth and truth to the story of power, love, and survival. You look at the remembered kings and queens and understand they're just prominent figures in a larger tale, where people like you keep the lifeblood flowing. You're not remembered, but you existed, and deep down, that's a greater triumph than all of history's fleeting glories. Loving a king like Henry VIII isn't a radiant fairy tale, but a tragedy hidden beneath glittering crowns and lavish feasts. It's the sweetest death in history, because you're remembered, celebrated, placed on the throne as a queen, a symbol of power and beauty. But it's also the bitterest death, as you trade freedom, happiness, and sometimes life to hold on to a man's fleeting love, his heart cold as ice. Loving Henry VIII is living in unrelenting fear, knowing love can turn into a sharp blade, red ink staining history's pages, and pain can become eternal in every breath. You learn that in the Tudor palace, love isn't mere emotion, but a form of power, a game traded with tears, blood, and betrayal. You look back on those days, the cold wedding nights, the silent struggles, the jealous, deadly glances. You recall the wives who stood where you did, beheaded, abandoned, dying alone, or surviving through silence and cunning. All are symbols of an era where love and power never went hand in hand, where every smile could be surrender, every vow a death sentence. But you also know that loving a king isn't just dying but living through challenging days, with resilience few possess, living to be a small, quiet part of history. You who endured those ups and downs aren't just a victim but a silent victor in the harshest survival game. And though you sometimes want to give up, to forget it all, you stand here, steadfast, carrying the story of Tudor women who knew how to love, live, sacrifice, and avoid being swept away by the currents of power and fate. Loving a king like Henry VIII is, ultimately, a journey of complex emotions, the sweetness of power, the bitterness of loss, the sting of betrayal, the sorrow of oblivion. But through it all, you find an undeniable truth. Love in any form is what makes people live, fight, and keep hoping. And if you've survived it all, if you still remember and recount this story, that's how you've loved, lived, and won. The story of Henry VIII's wives, women living in a trap-filled maze of power, where love is stained red with blades and blood, offers profound lessons for modern life in the United States today. First, their constant need to pretend and hide true emotions to survive in a high-stakes political and social environment is a warning about the power of self-awareness and holding on to personal values. In modern society, though not under a brutal monarchy, many face pressures to act strong or control emotions to fit into workplaces or social settings. This story reminds us that while adaptation is needed, we must stay true to ourselves, avoiding letting pretense consume our essence. Second, the pressure to reproduce and the judgment based on biological value in Henry VIII's story highlight the danger of societies imposing unfair, narrow standards on human worth. In the US, despite progress in self-determination and gender equality, many women still face biases and pressures about traditional roles in family and society. The story encourages us to respect diverse life choices and not judge people by outdated societal norms. Finally, the image of forgotten yet resilient wives, quietly surviving and rewriting their own stories, symbolizes personal strength and perseverance. In modern life, maintaining resolve and courage amid challenges is essential. You don't need fame or recognition to have value. Sometimes, surviving and staying true to yourself in tough times is the greatest victory. Learn from the Tudor women, know when to smile, when to stay silent, and always hold on to yourself in every circumstance. This is a timeless lesson, fitting for the US's culture of individuality and freedom of choice today. If you found the story of Henry VIII's wives insightful and valuable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more captivating videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next journey, exploring surprising and profound history.